He had nothing. Not a name people remembered, not a bed, not a future. Just an old coat and silence. Jonas had been invisible for years until one rainy night, a limping German shepherd appeared beside him, refusing to leave. The dog didn't bark, didn't beg. He just stayed. And in that stillness, something inside Jonas shifted. He gave the dog half his only meal. Then his trust. Then, when a child ran into traffic, the dog gave everything. And Jonas, once convinced he wasn't worth saving, risked it all to save him back. This is the true story of a broken man, a stray dog named Blaze, and a moment on the street that changed everything. Because sometimes the one thing that makes us human again isn't a person, it's a dog who never stopped believing in us. I didn't know I was a good man until I met him. The wind swept through the back alleys of the city, carrying the scent of rust, cold concrete, and distant fried oil from a closed food truck 2 blocks away. A flickering street lamp cast a weak yellow glow over a cracked sidewalk, barely illuminating the figures slumped beneath an awning that hadn't kept rain out in years. Jonas sat with his back against the brick wall, knees drawn up to his chest. His coat was threadbare, more patch than fabric, and his boots had long since surrendered to the elements. Beside him lay a small torn backpack and an empty plastic water bottle with the label half peeled off. He wasn't asleep, he never really slept, but his eyes were half shut. Not out of rest, but out of habit. It was safer not to look too long at anything. He didn't beg. He didn't shout. He didn't hold cardboard signs with tragic stories in black marker. In fact, he hadn't spoken to anyone in days. Words felt like a luxury for people who still had someone to speak to. People passed him every day and every night, as though he were a misplaced trash bin or a shadow that stayed too long. He had grown used to the silence that followed footsteps avoiding him. He had come to accept the chill in his bones, not just as cold, but as a part of himself. That was until he heard it, a soft, deliberate sound. Not footsteps, not wind, not the rustle of wrappers blowing across the curb. It was breathing. Slow, shallow breathing. He opened one eye and looked to his left. There, just beyond the edge of his boot, stood a dog. Not a mutt. Not some tiny stray scavenger. This one was different. A German shepherd, tall, proud even in its emaciated state. Its ribs showed beneath its coarse fur, and one of its front paws hovered off the ground, as if injured. But its eyes, deep, alert, almost human, were locked onto his. They didn't move. Neither of them. Jonas sat still, unsure whether to speak or just pretend the creature would vanish like all other things that once looked at him with curiosity. But it didn't move, didn't bark, just stood there breathing through a nose marked with a thin old scar. Finally, Jonas shifted. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a crumpled napkin with half a biscuit inside. He hesitated. This was supposed to be breakfast, maybe lunch, too, but something inside him cracked. He extended the biscuit with a slow, trembling hand. The shepherd limped closer, cautiously, then sat beside him, as if it had always belonged there. Jonas didn't know why, but for the first time in years, he whispered aloud, "You hungry?" The dog said nothing, just breathed, just stayed. And in the quiet, under that failing street lamp, a man who had long believed he no longer mattered, suddenly wasn't alone. The morning crept in slowly, not with sunlight, but with a dim grayness that made everything feel colder than it was. Jonas stirred beneath the awning, wincing as he stretched his back against the hard pavement. The street was quiet, save for the distant hum of delivery trucks and the soft rustle of yesterday's newspaper fluttering across the sidewalk. He wasn't alone. The dog, the German shepherd, was still there, lying close, not quite touching him, but near enough that Jonas could feel its quiet presence. Its eyes blinked slowly, sleepily, but they were open, watching, breathing, trusting. Jonas let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He reached over and gently scratched the fur behind the dog's ear. Its head tilted slightly, acknowledging the gesture, but it didn't move away. Jonas noticed its ribs again, the way it breathed shallowly, as if every inhale cost energy it didn't have. The injured paw was tucked under its chest now, but he could see the swelling. No fresh blood, but it looked bad. "You're not doing so great, are you?" Jonas murmured. The dog blinked once, as if agreeing. He looked down at the small pile of crumbs beside him, what remained of the biscuit he'd split in half the night before. The dog had eaten slowly, gently, not with the desperation Jonas expected from a stray. It had eaten like it had once known what it meant to be cared for. "You had a home once," Jonas said softly. "Didn't you?" The dog didn't answer, of course. But in its stillness, Jonas felt a heaviness, a kind of silent history. This dog had been abandoned or lost, just like him. He stood up slowly, groaning at the pull in his knees. The city had begun to stir. He needed to move before someone came to clear the sidewalks or worse, report them. "You coming?" The shepherd didn't hesitate. It rose, carefully favoring its injured leg, and limped after Jonas as he turned down the block. The two of them, man and dog, walked without a destination, only the vague pull toward warmth or food or something that didn't feel like the edge of existence. They reached a narrow alley behind an old bakery where the dumpsters sometimes held expired rolls. Jonas rummaged quietly, finding a stale croissant and a bruised apple. He tore the croissant in two and placed half on a napkin before the shepherd. The dog sniffed it, then looked at him. "What?" Jonas asked, almost smiling. "You're too proud to eat bad bread?" The dog ate it anyway, slow, grateful. As they sat in silence, Jonas watched him closely. This dog had something in him, something familiar, dignity, even in decay. "You need a name," Jonas said after a while. "Can't just call you dog, that's rude." He thought for a moment. "How about Shadow?" The dog didn't react. No, too cliché. He kept chewing the apple, eyes drifting upward. A beam of sunlight finally broke through the clouds and hit the shepherd's coat, illuminating patches of warm, golden brown beneath the dirt and ash. The way the light caught his eyes, deep amber, almost fiery, Jonas felt something stir in his chest. A long-forgotten memory of autumn leaves, of warmth. "Blaze," he whispered. "Yeah, Blaze." The shepherd's ears perked slightly. Jonas smiled. "Blaze it is, then." They sat like that a while longer, two broken things slowly beginning to form the shape of something whole. For the first time in forever, Jonas felt less like a ghost and more like a man again, because something in Blaze's eyes told him he was still worth being seen. By the third day, Blaze had become a shadow Jonas didn't mind having. They moved together across the city like forgotten notes in a fading song, quiet, careful, and invisible. Jonas had spent years learning how to disappear. But Blaze, in his limping dignity, didn't seem interested in hiding. The shepherd walked with his head held high, nose lifted to the wind, like he was tracking something Jonas couldn't see. Or maybe he was just remembering what pride used to feel like. They didn't talk, not that dogs could. But Jonas hadn't spoken to another soul in months. Not really. Not since the shelter closed. Not since the old man in the next alley over disappeared one morning and never came back. Jonas figured people didn't want conversation with a ghost. But with Blaze, it felt different. There was no pressure to explain who he was or why he'd ended up like this. Blaze didn't ask what he'd done wrong. He didn't look at the dirty clothes or the hands that shook when the cold got too deep into the joints. He just stayed. They'd found a routine. Jonas had a few places he knew where expired food was tossed just gently enough that it didn't splatter. A church where the back steps were warm from dryer vents. A laundromat where the owner turned a blind eye as long as Jonas didn't scare customers. Blaze followed, even when the sidewalk burned with afternoon heat or when the wind carried the heavy scent of rain. He moved slowly, careful of the paw that still hadn't healed, but he never fell behind. Jonas never spoke to others, but he did speak to Blaze. It started in fragments. "You ever sleep with one eye open? Bet you had a name before this, huh? You don't snore. That's good." It was strange, the things that came back. The rhythm of conversation. The impulse to care about something, someone. One afternoon, they found a dry patch of grass beneath an old oak tree in the park. Jonas sat down with the bag of bread crusts he'd traded for with 2 bottle caps in a favor. He broke one piece in half and held it out. Blaze took it gently, his jaws brushing against Jonas's fingers. Jonas stared at him for a long moment. "You don't bark," he said. Blaze stared back. "I like that." The silence between them was full, not empty. Full of things that didn't need to be said. A sort of agreement. You won't ask who I was. I won't ask what happened to you. Jonas leaned back against the tree and let the sun hit his face. It had been a long time since he let himself feel warm on purpose. Nearby, a woman jogged past with earbuds in. She glanced at them, at the ragged man with the proud dog, and kept going. But she didn't cross the path. Didn't tighten her grip on her purse. Jonas noticed, and for some reason, it stayed with him. Maybe it was Blaze. The way he sat tall, ears up, alert but calm. He made Jonas look less dangerous, less forgotten. That night, as they curled beneath a bench beneath the glow of a bus stop sign, Jonas looked at the dog who never barked and whispered, "You make me feel real again." Blaze, as always, didn't reply. But he didn't need to. He just laid his head on Jonas's leg and stayed. The rain had returned, not the violent kind, but a steady whisper that slicked the sidewalks and turned puddles into mirrors. Jonas pulled the collar of his coat tighter around his neck and looked down. Blaze walked beside him, as always, limping slightly but unfazed by the weather. His fur was soaked through, droplets clinging to his ears and snout. He didn't seem to mind. He never did. They had walked for hours that day, across familiar streets and unfamiliar turns. Jonas wasn't looking for anything, but he couldn't stay still. Rest had become harder now, not because he was cold or hungry, but because something had begun to stir. A kind of restlessness. Or was it hope? They passed a row of shuttered shops, their windows fogged and forgotten. A neon sign above one flickered between pawn and none. Jonas stopped outside a laundromat that was still open. Through the glass, warmth spilled out, laundry spinning in machines, people sitting in silence, watching their clothes tumble like they were waiting for something else. He turned to Blaze. "What do you think? Just stand near the vent?" Blaze said nothing, but his tail gave one slow wag. They stood there a while, not begging, just being. People came and went. A few glances tossed their way like coins that never landed. One man opened the door and dropped a pastry bag in front of Jonas. No eye contact, no words. But Jonas said thank you anyway. It felt strange in his mouth. He handed the soft center of the pastry to Blaze and kept the dry edge for himself. They found a spot behind the laundromat where the vents pumped out hot air. Jonas sat down, legs stretched out, shoes soaked. Blaze curled beside him, his body pressed close. For the first time, Jonas let himself lean in, not out of need but comfort. He looked down at Blaze's wounded paw. It was worse today, swollen, the limp more pronounced. The rain didn't help. "I need to get that looked at," Jonas murmured. Blaze rested his head on Jonas's knee, as if to say, "Don't worry about me. I've made it this far." Jonas frowned. "I used to say that, too." Thunder rumbled somewhere in the distance. Across the lot, headlights cut through the mist and stopped short of the curb. Jonas didn't react until he heard footsteps. A pair of sneakers approached slowly, cautiously. He looked up to see a girl mid-20s, maybe wearing a soaked hoodie and holding a phone. She had paused at a distance, unsure whether to keep going. "Is he friendly?" she asked, nodding toward Blaze. Jonas blinked. It had been a long time since anyone spoke to him like a person. "Yeah," he said softly. "Unless you're a rat." She laughed. Not the kind of laugh that mocked, but the kind people give when they're startled into kindness. "He's beautiful," she said. "What's his name?" Jonas hesitated. Then, Blaze. "Hi, Blaze," she whispered, crouching slowly. Blaze lifted his head but didn't move, his amber eyes steady on hers. After a moment, she stood up. "You two stay warm, okay?" She turned and left. Jonas watched her go, then looked down at Blaze again. "That's twice," he muttered. Blaze blinked. "People, they're looking at us differently." He didn't say more, but the idea lingered. Maybe it wasn't Blaze who made people less afraid of him. Maybe it was what Blaze brought out of him. He used to believe he was just waiting to disappear. Now, he wasn't so sure. The clouds had finally broken. After 3 days of rain and mist and gray breath in the air, the city was washed clean, at least on the surface. Puddles still lined the curb, but the sun pierced through at last, slicing shadows across the cracked pavement like threads of gold on torn cloth. Jonas and Blaze were walking along a quieter part of town, where the sidewalks widened and the trees, those that had survived the city's indifference, stood tall and dripping. Blaze limped more than usual that morning. The swelling on his front leg had worsened, and Jonas knew it. He'd tried soaking it in cold fountain water once, but it only made things worse. They were approaching a crosswalk when it happened. A sharp cry. A scream, sudden and jarring. Jonas turned his head just in time to see a girl, maybe 8, maybe 9, dart into the street. She was chasing a red ball that had rolled past her scooter. What she didn't see was the car speeding from the opposite direction, horn blaring too late. Time slowed. Jonas opened his mouth, but no sound came. But Blaze moved. With a low growl and a burst of speed that defied his injury, Blaze lunged forward, not at the car, not at the girl, but into her path. His body collided with hers just in time to knock her sideways onto the sidewalk. The car screeched and swerved, tires screeching over wet asphalt, missing them by inches before slamming into a lamppost. Jonas ran. The girl was crying, scraped but unharmed. The red ball floated gently into the storm drain. But Blaze was lying on the pavement, his side rising and falling in shallow, rapid breaths. His injured paw now splayed awkwardly, and blood thin and red seeped from his hind leg. Jonas dropped to his knees beside him. No. People had gathered now, voices, gasps, someone shouting for help. But Jonas heard none of it, only the breathing. The weak, stubborn breathing. He pressed his hands gently against Blaze's side. You stupid, brave dog, his voice cracked. You were supposed to stay. You were supposed to stay with me. The girl's mother was now at her side, crying, hugging her daughter. But the girl didn't look away from Blaze. Her wide eyes were fixed on the dog that had just saved her life. I need a car, Jonas shouted, panic rising. He needs a vet now. A man in a suit stepped forward, shocked but calm. I'll drive. Jonas lifted Blaze as gently as he could, arms shaking, heart pounding. He had nothing. No money. No documents. Nothing to offer. But he didn't care. He looked down at Blaze as they reached the car. I don't know what kind of man I am, he whispered. But you're better than most people I've ever met. Blaze didn't move, but his eyes, glassy and dimming, stayed locked on Jonas. And Jonas held on. To the dog. To the moment. To the part of himself he thought had died long ago, now screaming to stay alive. The waiting room smelled like antiseptic and silence. Jonas sat hunched forward in a plastic chair, hands trembling, his soaked coat still clinging to him. The white light above flickered, not enough to warm the chill that ran through his chest. He stared at the closed door with the faded sign. Emergency vet, surgery in progress. It had been over an hour. In his lap was a folded blanket. Someone had handed it to him without speaking. Maybe out of pity, maybe just reflex. Jonas hadn't said thank you. He hadn't said anything at all since the moment they took Blaze away on a stretcher. The man in the suit, Ryan, his name was, had driven them here in silence, glancing only once in the rearview mirror to see Jonas holding Blaze in the backseat like he was cradling a part of himself. The girl had cried the entire ride, even after her mother arrived to pick her up. Her name was Maya. She had refused to leave until she knew the dog would be okay. Now it was just Jonas. And the door. A soft voice interrupted the silence. You know, most people wouldn't have done what you did. Jonas looked up. Ryan stood across from him, a cup of steaming coffee in one hand and a paper bag in the other. I didn't do anything, Jonas muttered. Ryan sat. You carried him in. You didn't let go. That matters. Jonas shook his head. I don't have anything to pay for this. I don't even have an ID. There was a long pause. Then Ryan said, I already covered the deposit. We'll figure it out later. Jonas turned to him, stunned. Why? Ryan looked away, then shrugged. Because he saved my daughter. Jonas couldn't speak. The door finally creaked open. A young vet in green scrubs stepped out, her face tired but not grim. He made it through, she said gently. Jonas exhaled so hard it sounded like he'd been holding his breath since the street. "He's sedated," she continued. "The leg will need time. Possibly some physical therapy down the line. But he'll live." Jonas swallowed the lump in his throat. "Can I see him?" "Just for a moment." She led him into the small recovery room. It was quiet. The only sound a slow beep from the monitor beside the bed. Blaze lay on a blanket, an IV in one paw, the injured leg bandaged and raised. He looked impossibly small, yet still held a kind of gravity, even in sleep. Jonas knelt beside him, resting one hand gently on the shepherd's neck. "You dumb, heroic mutt," he whispered. "You didn't have to do that." Blaze didn't move, but his breathing was steady, stronger than before. Jonas lowered his forehead until it touched the edge of the bed. "I've got nothing left in this world," he murmured. "But if you wake up, if you come back to me, I swear I'll find a way to matter, a way to deserve you." Behind him, Ryan stood at the door, watching quietly. In that small room filled with blinking lights and the faint scent of antiseptic, something changed. Jonas didn't feel invisible anymore. Not because someone saved him, but because he was willing to give up everything for someone else. Even if that someone had 4 legs and never said a word. The next morning, Jonas stood outside a glass building he never thought he'd approach, let alone enter. It was modern, bright, and entirely out of place in his world, a 3-story community center with banners fluttering gently in the spring breeze. "Hope starts here." Inside, he could see volunteers moving chairs, stacking boxes, arranging tables. The warmth behind those windows made him feel colder by contrast. He turned to look at the car idling behind him. Ryan rolled down the window. "They know you're coming. Go on." Jonas hesitated, his hands clenched at his sides. "What if I don't know how to be around people anymore?" Ryan smiled faintly. "You knew how to be there for a dog who couldn't ask for help. That's more than most people know." Jonas looked down at his coat. It was clean now, freshly laundered, the holes patched. He hadn't asked for that. Ryan just did it. And Blaze? He was recovering in a foster home with full medical care, resting under warm blankets, his leg healing slowly. Jonas had visited him every evening since the surgery. Every single time, Blaze lifted his head at the sound of his voice. He swallowed hard, turned back to the building, and stepped inside. The lobby was quiet. A woman with kind eyes greeted him, clipboard in hand. "Jonas, right? We've been expecting you." He nodded slowly, uncertain. She extended a hand. "I'm Rachel. Ryan told us what happened. We don't get many stories like yours." Jonas looked down at her hand, then up at her face. After a beat, he shook it. She guided him into a modest room with sun spilling across the floor. There were chairs, a pot of coffee, and a whiteboard that read, "Re-entry orientation, day 1. 3 other people sat waiting, each with stories in their eyes, stories that hadn't been told yet. A man with tattoos covering old track marks. A woman who looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. A teenager staring at his shoes. Jonas sat quietly in the corner. Rachel spoke gently. "This isn't about what you did before. It's about who you're becoming now." He didn't say anything. But when someone asked why he came, he found himself answering out loud, surprising even himself. Because a dog jumped in front of a car for someone he didn't even know. The room fell silent. "Because he trusted me," Jonas added. "And I figured, if he still thinks I'm worth following, maybe I should learn how to lead." That afternoon, he stayed for the full session. That evening, he visited Blaze again. The shepherd lifted his head, tail tapping once against the floor. "I started something today," Jonas said softly, kneeling beside him. "Don't know where it's going yet, but maybe I'm not running anymore." He rested his forehead against Blaze's. And in that quiet room, man and dog breathed together again, this time with purpose. 6 months later, the bench under the oak tree had new paint. The park had changed just a little. The cracks in the path were patched. A new water fountain stood beside the playground, and on that bench where once a silent man and a limping dog had watched the world pass by, Jonas now sat upright, clean-shaven, in a Navy staff vest embroidered with "Hope Starts Here, Volunteer." Beside him, Blaze lay with his head on Jonas's boot. The bandage was long gone. The limp, barely visible now. His coat gleamed in the sunlight, and his eyes, those deep amber eyes, still carried that impossible stillness. But now they also held peace. Children ran past them. One small boy paused, pointed, and shouted, "It's Blaze." His mother smiled, waved shyly, and gently pulled the child along. Jonas looked down at the dog. "You've got fans now," he said, smiling. "Local hero." Blaze gave a slow, lazy tail thump. That morning, Jonas had spoken to a group of new arrivals, men and women sitting in the same folding chairs he once hesitated to occupy. He told them about the street, about fear, about silence, and about a German shepherd who chose him when no one else did. He didn't tell them everything. Not about the long nights. Not about the ache of self-loathing that once made him forget his own voice. But he told them what mattered. That love, even wordless and broken, could rebuild a man. The center director had asked him once, "Do you regret any of it?" Jonas had paused a long time before answering. "I regret waiting so long to believe I still had something left to give." Now, sitting on that bench, Jonas reached into his coat and pulled out a folded letter, creases soft from being opened too many times. It was addressed to whom he chooses next. He unfolded it and began to read aloud, softly, as Blaze rested, listening. "You're about to meet someone extraordinary. He won't bark much. He won't chase a ball. But he'll know when you're hurting, and he'll sit beside you without asking questions. He'll walk with you through the quiet, until your heart makes noise again. His name is Blaze. He saved me. I hope he saves you too. And if you ever wonder if you're a good person, just look at the way he looks at you. That's your answer." Jonas folded the letter, tucking it into his vest pocket. "I'm not letting you go yet," he said gently, scratching behind Blaze's ear. "But someday, if you need someone new, I want them to know the truth." The wind rustled the trees above. A few leaves broke free, spinning in slow circles. Jonas stood. "Come on, Blaze. Let's walk home." The shepherd rose, stretched, and stood beside him, no leash, no command, just silent loyalty. And together they walked back across the park, past the children, the sunlight, and the place where broken things once sat in the shadows, now filled with light. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this story. If it touched your heart even just a little, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next journey. We'd also love to hear what you felt. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice truly matters here. See you in the next story.